Hey, my name's Todd Wilson. I'm one of the founders of Exponential. I want to welcome you to today's edition of Backstage Live. Today, I am thrilled to have my friend Léonce Crump with me. Welcome, Léonce.
Hey, glad to be with you, bro.
Hey, Léonce is got a really great background. Let me start with probably the most important thing. Married to Brianna and has 3 girls and a boy in Atlanta. I've spent a little time with Léonce, and he loves his wife and kids, and so that's one of the most important things here. Léonce founded his church in 2008, Renovation Church in Atlanta, so he's near and dear to a lot of our hearts as a church planter. But if I go backwards in time with him, Léonce is, I think, an all-star wrestler in college, and it'll be fun to hear how you went from wrestling to football, and then Oklahoma Sooners, and then to the New Orleans Saints. And then probably most importantly was the step from athletics into ministry. And so, we're talking to the right person when it comes to a journey of calling and gift activating calling. And so I think we've got a lot to learn from Léonce today. So Léonce, we're glad to have you. Léonce is still currently the senior pastor. He's passionate about cultural renewal. And in terms of churches that we've looked at that are really trying to get this mobilization and gift activation thing going the right way, Léonce is certainly doing his best to go after that. So great to have you today, Léonce.
Excited to be with you guys. Have been a fan of Exponential for a long time. Glad to be becoming friend and family. So this is fantastic.
Yeah, it's especially fun for me today. I'm actually at New Life Christian Church today, my home church. New Life is the host of our Exponential Regional in Washington, D.C. on September 10th and 11th. And Léonce's going to be with us there. So where I'm at right now, you're going to be here just, I guess, a little over a month from now. So
yeah, super stoked. My little brother will actually be there with me. He's a D.C. resident. And so I'll get to spend some time with him as well and introduce him to Exponential. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, that's great. Well, we've had you on today to talk about gift activating because that's the topic you're going to have at Exponential. So we thought it'd be a great way for you to talk a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at Exponential. Let's do this. Let's start. This series of webinars we're doing right now, Léonce, is on Hero Maker. Dave Ferguson, it was referred to the book Hero Maker. That's our theme for all of 2018. And basically, if you start with this statistic that less than 4% of churches ever reproduce, we can't really conclude we have a church problem. We have a leadership problem. And so that's what really inspired the Hero Maker theme, was the idea that if we want to see churches reproduce, we need to see leaders reproduce. So this kind of idea of moving from being a hero, somebody who's at the middle of things, and the way I like to say it, they're leaving a legacy by what they build and leave behind, rather than a hero maker, which is about who you invest in and propel forward beyond you. So we're going to talk today about that, one of the 5 essential practices of hero making, which is this idea of gift activating. If you would, why don't we just start with kind of who's the 1 or 2 people in your life that you would say are the hero makers of who you are today, and just have had a significant impact in some of those pivot points in your journey?
Yeah, so I'd start with my mother and my father. We don't have time for all the details, but suffice to say, my mother grew up a part-time Catholic. My father grew up without faith of any kind. And when they came to faith, it was in dramatic fashion. The Lord did kind of a wonderful restorative work in their lives, in their marriage. And they began to disciple my brother and I early in our lives, but I actually didn't come to faith until I was 16 years old. And that was one of those pivotal moments where my mother pulled me aside and basically said, God has called you to ministry. Now, I'm 16 years old, and I'm still trying to find Deuteronomy in the Bible, but I've got this call of ministry on my life. And so I'll never forget that. And I look back now over 20 years, and through all the affirmations, through all the opportunities, through school, through everything, it was Léonce Crump who was the first one that noted that the Lord's hand was on my life for ministry. And my father, of course, affirmed that. I would say my father in that same vein because of the investment he made in me through the Word of God. As a matter of fact, to this day, if I'm preparing a sermon and Logos is being too slow or I don't feel like researching, I can call my dad and give him a few phrases and he can tell me exactly where a Bible verse is. And so he's still participating in shaping my life in that regard. And then Mike Wilson, who was the person that kind of formalized that call into vocational ministry when I was still in college at the University of Oklahoma, would be another person I would note in that regard. He basically, I don't know if this is the path that you all will lay out at Exponential, but he discipled me for about a year. He asked me to help him start to lead a college ministry. And so I was, doing assistant duties and running around and helping him disciple people and things of that nature. And then one evening I showed up and he was not there. And I called him. I said, hey, we're 30 minutes from start. Where are you? And he said, oh, you got it tonight. And so I had the whole service to myself. And I had to lead in that moment at a level that I'd never led before. And he was sure that I was going to fly and not flop, or maybe he was, but if he thought I was going to flop, he certainly gave no hint. And from that day forward, I led that college ministry until I graduated. So those would be probably my three biggest influences.
Let's go back, if we could, even as far back as you can remember into childhood. If usually we can look back and see stories embedded in your childhood or at some point that really shaped the calling and where you are today. So this is a two-part question.
Yeah.
How would you articulate your calling today? Like if you were telling somebody I'm called to, what's your calling today?
Yeah, my primary calling is to be an apostolic multiplier, small a, of course, of leaders in churches. I know that. I've always been a pioneer, so that's one of those things that I can look back in my childhood and see that that always started new endeavors. In the marketplace, it would be called entrepreneurship. I remember starting a yard cutting business at 10 years old, and I had guys working for me that I developed in the yard cutting techniques of my father. So that's kind of always been my rhythm, is to go into uncharted territory or to find a new path, to find a new way, to carve a new direction. And I've always seen that, and it's been the same since, of course, founding Renovation Church. One little modifier there. We moved here in 2008. We failed 3 times, and then we launched publicly in 2011, launched Renovation Church. And so the other aspect of my calling, if I could say it this way, would be prophetic, and that is speaking to culture. Trying to push the church to the public square to address the zeitgeist, the issues of the day, the spirit of the age, and speak redemptively into those moments rather than, weathering the storm or retracting from culture, but actually navigating into culture and not just participating in it or being swept up by it, but speaking truth into that moment, and then speaking truth for our context, into the church to say, what is your role here? What is God's redemptive lens for this moment? And how do we speak into it in a way that places the church at the center of the unfolding of history, rather than peripherally, where we're looking to culture, looking to government, looking to business, looking to all of these other wonderful things to inform the work of the church. It actually should be the other way around. So that is how I primarily see my calling.
So as we jump into this idea of gift activating, in your journey, I think you said at 16, your mother was affirming, or a family member was affirming ministry for you. But in going off to college, what did you think you were going to do when you went off to college?
Yeah, I had a very clear plan, actually. I was going to wrestle and play football. I was going to graduate with a bachelor's in political science and social studies, ethics, and then go to law school, finish law school and practice law for a few years, and then go into politics. That was my plan. And I had mapped it out well into my late 20s, early 30s. And ministry, though my mother, spoke this over me at 16 and really believed firmly that that's where God was calling me, ministry really became a disruption to the plan that I had for my life, which, seems to be the narrative that God so often paint for people.
Yeah. Why politics? What was it when you went off to college that that's a pretty well thought out plan. Get your degree, go into law, go into politics.
Yeah, I have, even when I wasn't faithfully serving the Lord, I've always had a particular compassion for people. And I didn't want necessarily to go into ministry, of course, until I finally submitted to the Lord. But I believed, and still do believe to some degree, but that would be another conversation. But I believed that good policy could actually help people flourish. And so I wanted to be a different kind of voice on the Hill. I wanted to create a kind of a third way between the elephant and the donkey, between Republicans and Democrats, and say, no, there's a third way here where there are redeemable qualities from each of these parties that we can maximize those things. We can actually serve the ends of the people rather than the ends of the government or the ends of lobbyists or things of that nature.
So is it safe to say, Léonce, when you were thinking the political path, the way you were going to measure success, if you were playing that plan out into the future, I'm assuming it wasn't a plan leading to being the president of the United States. It really was a plan to cultural change or to some kind of change in how things are, or what?
That's precisely correct. The win, the end game was to see more people flourish.
Yeah.
And not languish in, the wealthiest country in the world at the time.
Yeah. I think one of the things for our viewers to really note out of that, if you and I were doing life planning together right now, the reality is your calling today and what you're doing today is just a different measure of impact and results than where you were feeling led to then. It's actually very similar. This idea that you're a champion and a catalyst for cultural renewal, you've just got a different expression and calling into it at this point. And part of what ends up happening, you've already said it this is part of what hero makers do. They see in us things we don't see, whether it's prophetic or otherwise. And sometimes it's just a matter of them helping us get onto the right path. That isn't that we were on a wrong path, but getting into the path that God's got for us.
No, that's exactly right. And it's not overtly different, other than now, of course, because we believe in Jesus. I know that my efforts will extend beyond policy. They have eternal ramifications, which adds a different weight even to the responsibility. But yeah, the desired ends are very much the same. I think I actually have a more sustainable process now than perhaps I would have had in the political realm.
Yeah. So you come out of college, you're on the plan. How ministry then? Tell us about the turning point to ministry. What moved you the direction of ministry?
Yeah, so there's kind of a convergence of things, right? Mike Wilson begins to disciple me my sophomore year in college. I take over that ministry for my junior and senior year in college. I do one semester of law school, so I'm still working the plan. And my friend, Tommy Harris, which anybody from Community Christian should be familiar with because he's a Chicago Bear, or was a Chicago Bear. But my friend and teammate at Oklahoma, Tommy Harris, convinced me to give the NFL a go. He said, you ought to at least give it a go, man. You're an unnaturally gifted athlete. It would be a shame to waste, your youth and have missed this opportunity. Your mind will be there for law school. Your mind will be there for politics, but your body won't always be there. And I can tell you at almost 40 now, I'm very much feeling that reality. And so he convinced me to just give it a shot. And so I was, to answer your question, I was active in ministry through my last 3 years of college. But I decided to take a shot at the NFL at the encouragement of one of my good friends. And that's how I ended up playing professional football for those couple years.
And then football to ministry, what was the transition there?
Yeah, so even while I was playing, I was still, there's an old article, if you got a good research assistant, you can dig it up, but there's an article that Sports Illustrated, the magazine, did where they were detailing kind of the chaplain role that I was duly occupying on my team while I was playing. I was the guy's pastor. And so even as I was playing, there was still a bit of ministry happening. But the shift into vocational ministry took place after the NFL. I'd gotten hurt and pretty beat up, and that's a long story for another day. But I was coaching at the University of Tennessee, and I started going to a local church there and attending and worshiping. And then I began to volunteer, and the senior pastor there, as so often happens with the Lord, he felt directed to ask me to help him start a college ministry. He had no details on my history or that I had done that before. And I said I'd pray about it. And so I did. And that was the beginning catalyst of how I've spent the last, 15 years of my life, give or take. And so I started a college ministry there with about 4 students. Over the period of about 8 months, that it grew, well out of my control at first. And we began to have to put in systems and things of that nature. And then I went from there to another college ministry in Knoxville that had yet to be started, and started that as well. I met my wife in that one that I helped Pastor Kevin Wallace start. And then we married and moved together, started another college ministry in Knoxville, and served there for a couple of years, and started several ministries, including a homeless ministry. Now, this is cool with respect to gift activating. Little side street here. My wife and I helped start a homeless ministry under the bridge in Knoxville. We have not lived in Knoxville since 2008. And at our, what we call first look lunch here, which is kind of a newcomer's luncheon, a kid told me, he had just graduated from the University of Tennessee, told me that homeless ministry was still going on and that he had been serving in it the entire time he was in college. So that was just an incredible testimony to the kindness of the Lord, and something that we established that continued to be able to multiply itself. And so we moved from Tennessee to Atlanta in 2008, and that's when we began the journey of planting Renovation Church.
So I think it's important to note again on your calling at this point, that entire story is filled with, I got invited in to start something, I moved to start something, I started something. That apostolic part of your calling, even though the context is different from homeless ministry to young adults and students, it's still that common theme of the starting. So when you move to Atlanta, it's just kind of the natural next step, that apostolic starting thing for you. And that
is exactly right.
So let's do this, Léonce. Go back to the guy in Tennessee, the first pastor that talked to you about getting in to help start which was it, a singles ministry, you said?
It was a college ministry.
College ministry.
Yeah, right outside of Chattanooga.
Right. What was it? It was just that he had a need? Did he see something in you? What was the story behind the story of him inviting you into that?
Yeah. If I'm honest, and I don't know that he would even know this, but I think within himself, but I think he kind of saw an automatic draw in the ex-NFL, football player. I had visited that church while I was still playing in the NFL, because my parents were a part of that church at that time. And so I think there was some appeal he thought he could have to the students, particularly the UT students, to have an ex-NFL player there helping him establish a college ministry. I don't know that he would have, because we didn't spend enough time together for him to be keen on kind of an entrepreneurial apostolic gifting. I will tell you that once we began to talk about how to get it off the ground, what systems needed to be in place, and how we would market it, and the flow of the gathering and things of that nature, I think he began to get a sense then that, man, like there's something here that if we are able to maximize this, then we can really see a lot of gospel fruit from it. But our initial conversation was, hey, one of the younger guys here was an old church replant. And so at the time when I started with him, there might have been 50 or 60 people, and the average age was probably 50. And there are a handful of college students coming. So I was on the younger side of people actually a part of the church too. So some of that was convenience as well. Like, he was young, I was young. We're actually still good friends. He's 1 year older than me, leading a great church in Chattanooga. And so, we kind of butted a friendship, and that multiplied into a ministry partnership.
Let's press into this, Léonce. This really represents sort of the tension in this idea of gift activating. In gift activating, we could say there's two parts to it. There's helping Jesus followers figure out their uniqueness and their calling. And in your case, it's helping guide you toward that apostolic thing leading toward a church plant. But that idea of the internal figuring out what we're called to do. But then also in gift activating is the public acknowledgement, the public commissioning, the public sending. It's sort of, anointing you, I guess, to do what it is you're called to do.
Yes, it's the laying on of hands aspect of it.
The laying on of hands aspect. So, we know, most of our viewers know that our tension in church work is Sunday comes every week. Lots of volunteer slots that have to be filled.
Every week.
That friend of yours that recruited you in and saw the opportunity, that's our tension. Sometimes we've got to get people serving, and maybe it's opportunistic to get into certain things. But at the same time is this tension that we've really got to try to mobilize people into their area of giftedness.
Yeah.
Where I think we're falling short. So in your experience at Renovation, if you just take your own history with that, talk to us about how that whole process works at Renovation, how you're trying to mobilize people, on their giftedness, but within their specific area.
Yeah. So I can tell you for Renovation, and maybe this is unique to me, but I've never really had a slot filling mentality, so to speak. From our early core team phases. So we'll skip core teams 1 through 3. There's a lot of story to that, and a lot of learning. In core teams 2 and 3 is when I learned that Atlanta is one of the most transient cities in America, and you can have a team of 35 on a balmy October afternoon, and you can have a team of 6 on a cold December afternoon. and it's because 30 plus of them have literally moved away in a 1 month time period to take new jobs. So this entrepreneurial acumen that God has graced me with, I had to engage and re-engage multiple times just to get this thing off the ground, because our whole team is gone in an instant. But to skip ahead to the point, when we finally had a solid team of about 35 or 40 adults, one of the very first things that I did was what you just did with me. I had them sit down and do kind of a life assessment and talk about areas where they've failed, areas where they have succeeded, and areas where they have felt the most affirmed in who they were and what they were doing. And the example I used to kind of give them rails to run on is, I believe it was Prefontaine who said, "I run because I feel God's pleasure when I run." I kind of used that example to jump off of, and I said, where is the meeting point in your life if if you're a Christian? Because we had a couple people on the fence, even on our launch team, which is another cool story. But we had unbelievers help us launch a church. But if you're a Christian, what are the places in your life where you can point to where you felt both God's pleasure and your greatest joy in what you were accomplishing? And so I kind of took them through that process before we started doling out roles and assignments and who was going to serve where. And that's really been the culture of Renovation Church before we ever had our first public worship service. It's figuring out how to connect people to their gifts and their passions and their calling, and then creating lanes for them to run in order to be able to do that.
And Léonce, how do you, is that like a program or an official formal thing at this point? How do you kind of scale that to a larger church? It's one thing when you've got a small core team to do that, but when you're a big church, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a both end. So if you were to come and start worshiping with us right now, the first place we would push you to is First Look Lunch. where you would hear my story. My wife and I would tell you the story of the church, how we failed, where we won, how we got here, etc. Feed you Vietnamese banh mi. You would love it. And it would be amazing. And then at the end of that time, after you've asked all your questions, we would put in front of you a shorthand version of the APEST test and a shorthand version of a spiritual gifts test. And that would be the beginning of trying to find a placement for you to be able to serve. So you take that test, you're excited about renovation, you're ready to jump in. We realize that Todd is a bit of a gypsy, and he has this incredible entrepreneurial acumen. He sees problems, but he's not a complainer. He's a solutions-oriented person. I'm just doing a diagnostic of what I know of you from our relationship. So you see all the holes, but you don't have to just step back and whine about them. Once you see the holes and you bring the holes to someone's attention, you already got solutions 1, 2, and 3 to try to plug those holes. And so we're going to sit Todd down and be like, hey, your gifts can work in a lot of areas. I don't think teaching kids every Sunday is going to be the best place for you. I don't know if production is going to be the best place for you unless you just have a great desire for that. Do you think you would want to work as an ambassador? We don't call them volunteers here. I can tell you about that later if you want to know. But as an ambassador, do you think you want to work alongside our ops team and kind of help us maximize our Sunday morning experience? Where are we missing it with how people feel welcomed or getting from our parking garage, which is 3 blocks away, to our door? That's just what we have here in downtown Atlanta. How do we maximize that? So you begin serving there. If you decide to become a member here, then you go through a half day called Renovation 101, where you get into the details of the theology, the philosophy of ministry, kind of expectations of membership, stuff like that. And at the end of that time, you will be given a Path 4 and a Path 6 profile to kind of help surface your natural and adaptive leadership style, along with this APEST and along with the spiritual gift test. And those things will be put together to kind of give you a few different pathways you can run in, and then you begin to run in those lanes. So that's the very, very formalized way that happens. Informal way that this happens here is people have a passion for something, and because they know the narrative of our church and they know how we're wired, they can go to either their parish elder or one of the staff pastors and say, hey, I really have a desire to see X type of ministry get off the ground. Will you support me? And because we have a permission-giving culture, I want some royalties for getting that into this webinar. Because we have a permission-given culture, people know that. And so our foster care ministry and foster and adoption ministry was not mentioned from the stage one time in its entire first year of existence. We had one young lady, with the support of our staff and our pastors, running point on getting our licensures, getting our appropriate relationships established, getting our families trained once they got children placed, getting respite homes established. That's just where she put her whole heart. And she had the resources, both financial and people, in order to be able to do that. There's a meeting happening right now that I was actually supposed to be in because we're getting ready to start a disability ministry, sparked from the heart of a young lady named Erica Spittler. And so we're trying to figure out what she needs in a macro sense from a support standpoint in order to see that flourish and in order to see that thrive. So that's kind of the formal and the informal way that happens here.
I want to take just a short break for a second to welcome anybody who came in late. We're with Léonce Crump today from Atlanta Renovation Church talking about gift activating. And Léonce is going to be with us in Washington, D.C. here in just over a month at one of our Exponential regionals in D.C. actually talking about this idea of gift activating. So if you're with us, we are going to be taking some questions here in a couple of minutes that we'll give to Léonce. So you've got the ability on your chat function on the live stream to put any questions in that you'd like us to ask Léonce. I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. I want to circle back to a couple things you said, Léonce. Let's come back to the idea of APEST for a minute.
Yeah.
You and I had a conversation months ago that I was very intrigued. I'm interested to understand just briefly your exposure to APEST, and then if you would, talk how you're not just using it with other people, you've used it with yourself at your church and with your elders in a pretty profound way with you. So if you could kind of give that introduction of how you were exposed to it and even your own experience with it with your elders.
Yeah, let me do a couple of hilltops. So we were pioneers in the missional church movement. We started missional communities before we had a public gathering. And as a matter of fact, first time I met Jeff Vanderstel from Selma, neither one of us knew that the other was doing what we were doing. We both knew a bit about Mike Breen. And I didn't know Alan Hirsch, but Vanderstel did. So I got invited to speak at the Verge Conference by Stu out at the Austin Stone, and talked about missional communities in the context of a diverse church, which it is. It does present different challenges. And that's where I met Hirsch. And we hit it off. He called me a foxy minx. That is a direct quote. And because he's just a strange dude. And we just became friends from there. And that's where I got introduced to APES from a pragmatic, thought out, applicable standpoint. So, and I say it that way because I've always been intrigued by Ephesians 4. I've always been intrigued about how to mine, surface, and activate those different giftings in people, and how you see them in a marketplace sense. So, moving from like apostolic to entrepreneurial, moving from prophetic to truth teller, moving from evangelist to kind of salesman, and working through those processes. But meeting Hirsch there in Austin was the first time I was introduced to the concept in the way that he presented it. And so the way it intersected my own story is at year 3, I would say, year 3 or 4, with renovation, I started to really feel boxed in. The elders seemed to be getting risk averse. I want to be generous to them, and I'll say seemed to be getting risk averse. Everyone was getting pretty settled into some of the success that we had experienced. So, we were a scratch church plant, a parachute church plant that by year 4 had become a church of 600, in the middle of downtown Atlanta, which was a phenomenal feat. And so everybody was just kind of pleased with where we were, and kind of content in falling into a rhythm of having me operate as pastor shepherd, which of course, as we just went over, is not my primary gift. And so after a lot of prayer and a lot of wrestling, I went to my elders and to the other staff pastors, and I said, listen, I really feel like I need to get out of the way. And of course, what do you mean get out of the way? I said, well, I have taken renovation, as far as renovation can go, in the way that renovation is going. If we are content to have great services and have great groups and have strong preaching and great worship and do some community outreach and just live that rhythm for the next 30 years, I think it will be beautiful. I just don't think I'm the guy. I'm not pastor shepherd. That's not how I'm wired. I have to take new ground. I have to explore new ventures. I have to pioneer some things to find my greatest joy in how God has made me. And so I want to give you guys my 6-month notice, and so that you can begin to look for a replacement either inside or out. And that was you want to talk about a quiet room where no one was breathing for a few moments. And so one of my elders said, hey, let's just take a step back. Let's all take this to the Lord in prayer, and let's revisit it in our next elder meeting. So I agreed to be able to do that. And I was blown away when they came back and they said, we realize how you're wired. We see that you're stifled, because I was acting out a little bit. I'll be honest. I was acting out, not in any sinful ways, but I was breaking, perfectly functional systems just to rebuild them again. Like the group system's broken. Like we need better assimilation. We need, and nothing was wrong with it. I just didn't have anything to do other than, spend 10 to 15 hours studying for a sermon and then preach and then do some staff development stuff. But there was no new venture. And so they came back, and it was a really beautiful moment. They said, we want you to be our pastor, but we want you to be our pastor the way you're wired to be our pastor. So tell us what you need. And we made a massive organizational restructure to kind of pull me out of some of the day-to-day and free me to function more in that apostolic vein.
So how does that, Lance, if I go to your history, you've got a pattern of every couple of years you need to start something new. I mean, back to the different ministries when you were a volunteer. Starting this church in 2011, you were 3 years into it and you're getting bored, okay?
Yeah.
That was just 3 or 4 years ago. So you ought to be at a point right now where your natural rhythm would be that you're getting a little boxed in or bored right now. So what is it that your elders did 3 or 4 years ago that makes it different today? Like how do you get that apostolic, thing going right now, to just keep things new and exciting for you?
Yeah, new and exciting, yes, but not just new and exciting. It has to be an opportunity to break new gospel ground or to move our church forward in a catalytic way. So honestly, for the last year, I've been so embroiled in trying to find new space for us to worship. We planted 2 churches in the last 2 years. So I've been coaching those planters and their wives and kind of living vicariously through the problems they're dealing with right now and helping them solve those problems. Exponential, honestly, is a great outlet for me. When you and I had that conversation about Made for More, I don't know if that'll come up today, but it called for more. And I'm like, I want to, Made for More. Like, you should do that, and all that juice, all that energy started flowing. And so now we have a whole funding campaign coming out of that conversation. So thank you very much for that. So there's been enough activity over the last 24 months that is so far out of the rhythm and routine of just weekly pastoring that it just kind of continually been scratched. And then, of course, last year we launched the Renovation Church Planning Network. And not that we've left Acts 29 or anything like that, but this is kind of a sub-network of like-minded churches, and more like a family of churches, to be honest, that are heavily focused on living out these transcultural expressions and pressing into cultural renewal and establishing themselves in urban centers, because I really do feel like we need a different kind of support system. So all of those things happening right now have really kept me energized beyond just the routine week in, week out, Sundays coming type of rhythm. So
the key is that your elders have put things together in a way that gives you the flexibility to find the entrepreneurial apostolic things to do. You're
not only giving me the flexibility, but not feared when those things came along. Part of it was that there was a period there where every time I brought up a new venture, it was like pulling teeth or running against the wind. And I'm like, okay, if we're not going to take risk here, if we're going to settle in at 500 with $1 million in the bank and call it good, then I'm not here for that. I want to empty that account. I want to plant as many churches as possible. I want to start organizations. I want to multiply leaders. I want to send people globally. I want to establish new compassion sites. That's another thing that we're doing right now, because I was on the Serengeti with Kevin Myers, and he said, my only regret with compassion is there's places we can't go because they don't have a church there. And compassion works exclusively through churches. I'm like, well, I'm on the board of the largest church planting network in the world. Why aren't we planting churches so that compassion can go to more places? So that was another, initiative that was an outlet for me to kind of put that energy to use rather than twiddling my thumbs with it.
Hey, Léonce, I want to give credit where credit's due, because I'm realizing for our viewers' benefit, our 2019 theme was originally Called for More. And based on the conversation with you and the inspiration with you, we changed the 2019 theme to Made for More. So you've actually kind of taken it from you.
Well, no, I give it with joy, because that is what I do. I mean, that's one of those things that gave me so much energy that day. to contribute. I mean, I don't need my name on anything, man. I mean, I'm like you in that way, Todd. If I see the kingdom flourishing and multiplying, nobody could ever see my face again. I don't care. So call for more, made for more, made for more. That's awesome all the way around.
So we're starting to get some questions come in. Let me ask you one last question, and then we're going to jump to Q&A.
Yeah.
This idea of, I'll say not needing to have your name on it or even celebrity status. You know, a woman named Cint Marshall is the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks now. She was the senior VP at AT&T and Human Resources. She's been a speaker at Exponential, and she's challenged a lot of the church planters with the idea that when she goes to church, she needs to be willing to do whatever she needs to do, hold babies, hand out flyers, and at the same time, her church needs to recognize that she has a mission field that only she can uniquely go into out into the cracks and crannies of society, and that we've got to find the balance between the two. You've had to deal that. Lecrae is in your church. How do you deal with where you've got people that clearly their mission field is beyond the walls of the church?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, it's kind of citing what Dave said with respect to kingdom multiplication. You have to change the metrics. You have to change the metrics and realize, and of course, having felt stifled myself, so I guess I have a little bit of an advantage in having felt it. But when you change the metrics and realize that when Lecrae goes to perform on Jimmy Fallon and share a gospel worldview, that is born of my preaching, his community group, and his time here in our church, and he takes us with him, then that changes the metrics, because my goal is not to get renovation as big as renovation can be. If I wanted to do that, there's a lot of different choices I'll make. And being in downtown Atlanta is one of the first choices I wouldn't have made, for landmass reasons alone. But if the metric is that whether I'm known or not, that we see as many people move from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light as possible, and we see as many people operating and fully flourishing in their gifting as possible, and those two things meet, then I can die satisfied. And by God's grace, Lecrae has been a guy in more than one way that has given a nod to my discipling him, serving his family. As a matter of fact, on his latest album, before Let the Trap Say Amen, the one right before that, I'm on that album. I didn't even know I was going to be on that album. The album gets ready to come out. He's like, "Hey, Pastor, I got a surprise for you. Turn it to track number 2. And so it's just been a really cool relationship in helping him understand, because there was a time where he wanted to be an elder, and I'm like, brother, that's not, maybe when you're done, you will serve our church very well when you're done with that aspect of your gifting, because you will be another entrepreneurial catalyst on our elder team. But until then, we need to be a support system, a pathway, to some degree, a barrier to help you make good decisions about who you partner with and who you don't. But most of all, we need to be a continual sending and refilling station for you, so that when you are here 28 Sundays a year, tops, by the way, tops, that you are receiving the good news, you're being refreshed. There's not a burden on you to run down and serving kids or drive our bus to the parking deck. And that during the week when you're here, that we have community around you that kind of understands the nature and the rhythm of your life. And then lastly, that your family is well cared for when you're out on the road.
Is what you're describing, Léonce, was that a culture that was just natural for you? Did you have to learn it? What you're describing is not normal. Like, most of us would see Lecrae as an opportunity for growing our church bigger, for creating some killer arts thing that draw in artists. You're describing a culture that's exactly open-handedly opposite of how a lot of churches would do it. So was that just a natural, you're a fluke of nature and it was natural for you, or was it a hard thing that you had to develop?
I would kind of put it somewhere in between. So some of it was natural. I've experienced having been exploited as a quote celebrity. I mean, I wasn't a Hall of Famer or anything, but I was a fairly well known, fairly well paid NFL player. And after being used to build up enough men's breakfasts at different churches, I understood what that exploitation felt like, and then what it felt like to kind of be out on an island with no one reaching out to me and no one concerned for my welfare when I wasn't in the building. So I knew that from the personal side. And then the other side of it is, there were some hard decisions made, because I know that perhaps we could have done more here on the back of his name. But what does that do for what God made him to do? And so it's interesting. You want to talk about just the opposite. He was at another church when he came to Atlanta, and for his own reasons, and that's his story to tell, he decided to move to Renovation. And I told him he couldn't come here, and he was shocked. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Yeah, I don't want you here." And this was in the early days. I mean, Lecrae and Dara had been with us since 2012. So at the time, we might have been about 200 people. And that would have been a real shot in the arm, in a lot of respects. And I said, "Yeah, you can't come here." And he said, "That's crazy. No pastor's ever told me I can't come to church." I said, "Well, you can be a part of Renovation as long as you understand that God's plans for Renovation is not to grow on Lecrae's back. You can come here and be a part of our community. You can come here and be pastored and discipled. You can come here and be built up in your gifting and calling. But you can't come here fearing that you're going to be used or expecting that your celebrity buys you some kind of different reality." I mean, we had a long conversation about it. So I didn't hear from him for about 6 months. And then one Sunday he was just there with his family, and he's been here ever since.
Well, and it's that kind of culture that will draw people in. All right, we've got a question from Chris. Chris wants to know how you help people integrate APEST into their life quickly yet effectively. How you kind of scale that, getting APEST down into people's lives.
Yeah, for 85% of people, it's usually pretty quick and pretty effective, because when you can tie it to neuter language and help them see the parallels. So this is what we were kind of talking about earlier, is in what you did, with me just now. It's like, okay, 10, you started something, 12, you started something, 16, you started something, 21, you started something. There's clearly history here of entrepreneurial acumen and success around it. And so it's getting people to take the biblical idea and in an application way, apply it to their rhythm and their reality. And usually it happens pretty quickly. We've had a couple trial and error where you'll have some really omnicompetent people who don't know which direction to lean, because they are gregarious like an evangelist, but they actually care about people's hearts, and they're actually, good at communicating. And so, like, should I teach or should I do it? I'm like, well, which one brings you the most joy? And that's usually my first go-to. Is there's a lot of things I can do. What must I do? I can preach, I can teach, I can lead, I can shepherd, but those are not things that I must do. What I must do is pioneer. And if I have space to do those other things, I'll do those other things too. And so we take them kind of through that kind of process. Every table has a table host, an elder or a staff member that's been through the process, understands the process, and they lead them there at the table as well.
So in your case, if you're a member at Renovation, the APEST language is a natural thing for you. The average person just knows the language.
Hopefully it's said enough that they should know it. But as I tell my staff every day, by the time you're sick of saying something, your best people are just getting it. But I would say a great majority of them are very familiar with APEST. We also have a very intentional leadership pipeline, which I don't find in a lot of churches. And I know you know that, because we've conflated leadership and discipleship, and they're not the same thing. And so in our leadership training in the Renovation Leadership Institute, we take APEST through that as well. So there have been about 350 people just through that process that have already been through APEST as well.
We actually have a question from Greg that's right in the heart of what you're talking about. A lot of people are wrestling these days as people are implementing leadership pipelines with the tension between a leadership development pipeline and a disciple-making pipeline. How do you deal with that? You know, are yours integrated? Are they separate? How do you deal with the tension between the two?
Yeah, we have two different paths. We call it leadership path and discipleship path, and they run on rhythms. And so over the course of the year, you can go through both. If you come mid-year and you want to go through the leadership path through a formalized process, you've just got to wait until it comes back around. You know, at the end of the day, it's realizing, one, that you can't do everything you want to do at the same time. And so you have to put a few stakes in the ground and let the chips fall where they may. And then two, knowing that informal leadership development, if you have great leaders, is always happening anyway and should be happening. And so our more formalized leadership pipeline is really just kind of honing in on the leadership development that people get at our groups rallies, at our groups training, at our ambassador rally, at our ambassador training, on their ambassador teams, from their point leader on their ambassador teams. So we have a development culture. I mean, our staff meeting right now, 60% of our staff meeting is development, where I'm teaching new principles on leadership or life management or, you know, time management skills or organization or things of that nature. So that's just always been our way, is to have a holistic development culture. And then we have these two formal path lines that kind of create a lane for those things to be pushed into, a channel for those things to be pushed into.
Yeah. And Léonce, you've referred to sort of the process with a 101, a 201, different classes, getting people into different assessments. Andrew's given us a question. Talk a little bit about the structure, and do you have like staff that help people through the process? Do individuals have coaches? How do you turn, you know, good intentions of classes and assessments into an actual more formal pipeline to move people through it?
Yeah, so the answer is yes to all of those things. So going back to First Look Lunch, that day you'll sit at a round table and you will have a table host at that First Look Lunch that will answer questions at interims and help you navigate through the actual taking of the test, so to speak. And then where you land, you're then partnered with either a ambassador, department head, division director, or coach. And so you're partnered from that moment so that someone can take that information and help you connect it to a real world opportunity to maximize your leadership, to maximize your gifting.
You referred to an ambassador earlier. Tell us a little bit more about what an ambassador is.
Yeah, we use the word ambassador in place of the word volunteer because we firmly believe, particularly for the Christian, that you don't volunteer for the body of Christ, but that you are actually an ambassador of Christ, according to 2 Corinthians. And it instills a sense of dignity in all the places that people serve. So, you know, everybody thinks it's special to be on stage. No, the most important person on a Sunday morning for us is the person standing in the parking garage that's 3 blocks away from our building. Because if Todd and his family shows up and they have a horrible experience at the parking deck, it doesn't matter what I say by the time you get to that seat, if you follow through and go to that seat. And so when we tell, you know, our guys standing in the parking garage, listen, you're an ambassador for Christ in this moment. That means that you are a representative of who Jesus is and how Jesus would engage this person. And that means that what you're doing is not menial. What you're doing is just as important as what I'm doing on the stage. That's a conversation we have all across our organization so that everybody knows that everybody matters and everything they do matters equally. It is equally weighted. And so rather than calling somebody a volunteer and creating a culture, and again, this is a personal deal. Everybody's got their way that they use language, but I believe language shapes culture. And with the baggage beyond, you know, the church of what a volunteer means, which is you show up when you want to, you do as much as you want to, and you leave, whether it's value or investment or not. We didn't want to bring that into our cultural language because we believe language is so important to shaping culture. So we ditched the word volunteer and we use the word ambassador.
Well, I have to tell you, Léonce, I guess we're stealing a lot of words from you. It's funny, just last week, Larry Wackemeyer, who's also part of our team of pastor out in Long Beach, Larry and I are both doing ebooks right now for this Made for More theme for next year on mobilization. And we've wrestled with what language to use. What should we call, is it volunteers? What word to use? And here's what's fun. We went through the entire New Testament and made a list of everywhere you see the words of Christ Jesus or of Christ or of Jesus. It made a list of probably 75 times where the New Testament talks about of Christ Jesus. And here's what's fascinating. We were able to group that into 3 different groupings. The first group of words were the narrative of what Jesus did for us, dying on the cross. The second grouping of words were what Jesus equipped us with to do what he's calling us to do here. And the third grouping of words, which only boiled down to 5 or 6, were the roles that Jesus gives us of Christ Jesus. And when we looked at those 5 or 6 roles, prisoners, servants, apostles, ambassadors is the word that we concluded out of the 5 or 6 words of roles of Christ Jesus that was the best representation of this idea of mobilization of the priesthood of all believers. So
there you go.
You've affirmed the ambassador thing here for us. One last question that we've got in from Vincent. What advice would you give a young church planter that wants to send people out to plant more churches?
Vincent, I would tell you to sit down and think through a strategic way that you will recruit, develop, and deploy church planters. What is necessary, what is optional, and what is optimal in the training of a church planter. What skills, giftings, and talents must you see in order to affirm a church planter? So here's for instance, if you come into the Renovation Network church planting residency, the first question you're going to be asked is, what have you started? And how did it go? Because if you've started 1, 2, 3, 4 things and they've all failed, then you probably don't have a high entrepreneur acumen or you haven't had good coaching. If you're 50-50, I feel a little better. If you're 75%, I feel great because everybody's not going to win every time. But those pieces have to be thought through specifically. What type of support are you going to provide? Is it going to be financial support? Is it going to be coaching support? Are these denominational churches? So will there be a covering in place and a body to which the senior or lead pastor can appeal if the church is crazy, or in a body to which the church can appeal if the pastor goes crazy? So you've got to think through all of those pieces, even at your young age. We planted our first church in our 2nd year. And in part it was because I don't think I knew it was 4% at the time, but I think I did know that if a church didn't multiply within the first 3 years, they were probably never going to multiply. And so that was something that I pushed very hard for in the early days, even though we did not have the people or the money to give. But God was kind and he met that moment. And we have always recouped in kind anything that we've been willing to give away.
Well, Léonce, I want to thank you for being with us today. I'm grateful that you're a family member at Exponential and grateful that you're going to be speaking at our DC Regional here in another month. I should mention for everybody's benefit, because I only mentioned the DC Regional, we've got 6 more Hero Maker events this fall. Washington, DC, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, Chicago, and New York City. And when you look at the speaker lineup, I mean, it's as high a quality as Léonce in DC. I mean, it's just amazing, the speaker lineup. So lots of opportunity. We've made it really easy and designed these regionals for entire teams to come. So the pricing is special for 5 people, 10 people. I think 10 people come for under $70 a piece. So price really isn't an issue for most people. But we're very grateful that you've taken the time out today, Léonce. I learn from you all the time. So I appreciate you taking the time to invest in us and invest in so many leaders out there.
Oh, it's absolutely a joy, brother. It really is.